I beat Mega Man 7 in one sitting without taking damage. This video is going to cover the rules for the challenge, the route for how it was achieved, and review the runs that eventually ended in the successful one. This video is a summary of the run. You can find the full run in the video description. The rules for this run are as follows. First and foremost, this must be performed by a real person in one sitting. Some runs out there are what is called tool assisted, effectively meaning scripted inputs and gameplay from a computer. Mega Man 7 was played and performed by me live on Twitch. Doing all of these challenge runs live is a personal requirement of mine. No deaths or damage of any kind is allowed. No major glitches that allow skipping content are permitted. In Mega Man 7, there are some zips you can do, which are techniques to allow the player to bypass sections of the game. There are also some ways to perform what are called quick kills, which allow you to bypass fighting a boss, notably Turbo Man and Spring Man. These techniques were not allowed for this challenge. Pressing pause is permitted. In Mega Man 7, the L and R buttons allow for swapping weapons, but some tools like Rush Coil must be selected from the menu. A general good faith rule is in place to disallow pressing pause to pause buffer enemy actions. Generally, it is okay to press pause to change weapons as part of strategy. This isn't a hard and fast rule and is hard to enforce, but the overall goal is to have a clean run that doesn't rely upon unfairly using pause buffering techniques to navigate the hard and stressful parts of the game. In this run, pressing pause to use Rush Coil and Rush Jet is perfectly permissible and at times required. The Western US version of this game was played. Rockman 7, the Japanese version, has some minor differences, most of which are irrelevant to the challenge. Rockman 7 famously has random cutscenes that play after each Robot Master that have variable length, which speedrunners have to deal with. No major gameplay differences are present to distinguish choosing between versions for me, so I chose to play Mega Man 7 with English text. Mega Man 7 is the series' first 16-bit game on the SNES after 6 entries on the NES. It was released after Mega Man X and introduced the trend of multiple different series in the Mega Man universe continuing at once. Compared to pretty much every other mainline entry, Mega Man 7 has much larger sprites of Mega Man and all enemies relative to the screen size. Overall, the game plays similarly to the classic entries before it, with 8 Robot Masters and a Wily Castle segment. This game only has one set of castle stages instead of 2, which would continue to be the trend again for future entries. Mega Man 7 also started the trend of changing up the way the Robot Masters are available to the player. There is first an intro stage. Then, instead of all 8 Robot Masters being available from the start, only 4 are available. After the first 4 are completed, a mid-stage is completed at the Robot Museum, then 4 more Robot Masters are unlocked. Then the Wily stages are unlocked. With respect to the routing of this challenge, the first 4 Robot Masters follow the same as most speedruns do. Cloudman is chosen first because his stage is relatively simple to complete with only the Mega Buster, and his boss fight is very clearable without any special weapons. Although he is very weak to Danger Wrap and is effectively stun-locked while being hit with it, the other 3 Robot Masters are much more difficult to fight with Buster while avoiding taking damage. It is very natural to start here. From here, weakness order is followed. Another reason for fighting Cloudman first is that Cloudman's weapon, Thunderbolt, allows access to Rush Jet and Junkman's stage, an invaluable resource for the game. Junkman is highly susceptible to Thunderbolt, so the stage and the boss are cleared with ease. Following this is Freezeman, a reasonable stage with a fairly challenging boss, then Burstman, a stage that benefits from having weapons due to its mini-boss, as well as having the boss's weakness. The Robot Museum is unlocked after defeating 4 Robot Masters. Afterwards, 4 more Robot Masters are available. This is where the routing for this game gets much more subjective. There are multiple considerations for the player to undertake. Shademan can reasonably be fought with Mega Buster and Freezecracker, and Springman is somewhat reasonable to fight with Mega Buster, but is a little risky. But most importantly, we need to talk about Slashman as a whole. This Robot Master is single-handedly the hardest part of the challenge without any question. Most boss fights in Mega Man are self-explanatory to some degree, but this fight is both complex and hard enough to warrant some extra time to explain what's going on. First off, Slashman is weak to both Freezecracker from Freezeman and Scorchwheel from Turboman. As of completing 4 Robot Masters, the player has Freezecracker. Priestcracker also does 6 damage to Slashman instead of the 4 damage from Scorch Wheel. So it is off the bat a reasonable place to visit first after the Robot Museum stage. But his difficulty is the main reason the player would want to clear him as soon as possible, because generally it is best to get the hardest parts out of the way in this sort of challenge to give time to reset failed attempts more quickly. Let's discuss his movement pattern. There are 2 major parts of the fight. First, when he is actively moving around, he will jump towards Mega Man. He will jump either short or long in 2 predictable arcs, and it's reasonable to react to where he goes. When Mega Man is within a certain range, Slashman will pause on the ground and do a slash attack. Outside of some difficult mix-ups and technical errors, it's reasonable to fight him in this part. The idea is to react to where he jumps, position yourself well, and jump when he slashes. We'll talk about how to correctly damage him in upcoming discussion. Phase 1 is not the problem for fighting him, it's Phase 2. And Phase 2 is extremely difficult and complicated for a litany of reasons. Phase 2 of Slashman involves him jumping into the ceiling and becoming invulnerable for some time. Then, 5 dinosaur eggs will fall from the ceiling in completely random locations. This is truly the hardest aspect of the fight, dealing with the eggs. When the eggs fall on Mega Man's head, they will cause Mega Man to not be able to fire weapons or slide, though Mega Man can still walk. If the eggs fall on the ground instead, they leave behind a goop trap where if Mega Man walks on the goop, he'll get stuck. While in the goop trap by foot, Mega Man can fire weapons but cannot move whatsoever. In both cases, either Mega Man being hit overhead by goop or being stuck on the ground, mashing different directions and the Y and B buttons will break Mega Man free. After about 3 out of the 5 eggs have spawned, Slashman will randomly pick a side to reveal himself on. Then he will also randomly pick whether he will do an invulnerable charge at the player or will simply drop down. Afterwards, he cycles back to Phase 1 where he jumps short or long and does a proximity-based slash attack. Then the cycles repeat. Another aspect to cover is how he moves between phases. When in Phase 1, he will jump roughly 7 times before he automatically jumps on the wall and begins Phase 2. If Slashman is hit with his weakness, he will be stunned for a small amount of time, then begin Phase 2. And finally, after taking 2 individual hits, not damage, of any weapon, he will begin Phase 2. This is all important knowledge for later. So what makes it so hard to fight Slashman? The sheer randomness of possibilities in Phase 2 is the main driver. The eggs will fall in completely random locations, and the player has to do their best to dodge them or mash out of either goop scenario. Mashing out takes about a second if done correctly, but the hardest part of mashing out is that the best way to mash out is to alternate left and right on the D-pad, which means that when you've cleared the goop, you'll be moving essentially in a random direction, and you have to course correct immediately. Even something as simple as him choosing to charge you from the wall or just simply drop down at the end of Phase 2 means the player is never really safe. There are no safe spots, it's pure reaction timing and not getting completely unlucky on patterns. To make matters worse, the player has to fight Slashman twice, once in his stage and again in the refights. And in the refights, his arena is even smaller, which gives the player less time to react to the falling eggs. Not to mention the pressure of taking a damageless run up until that point and having to perform the fight. I'll comment on this later, but Slashman was easily the reason the run took me so long to complete. Okay, so back to the routing discussion. All of this Slashman discourse is to highlight that he and his stage should be tackled first. King Gojulus, the mini-boss in Slashman stage, is also finicky and should be cleared as soon as possible. After this, weakness order is followed once again. Springman is a fairly simple stage and boss, there's nothing really to worry about in the whole endeavor. Shademan comes after. His stage has a branching path and the east exit from Van Pooken, the mini-boss, is taken, but otherwise Shademan and his stage are reasonably clearable too. The 8th Robot Master is Turboman. Turboman's stage is one of the more difficult stages to clear, with the finicky tire section, the flame pillar section, and the CC truck, the mini-boss. Afterwards, the Wily stages are unlocked. There is no shopping for this run, and besides Rush Jet, none of the extra upgrades are collected. I briefly considered getting the Proto Shield, since it has the interesting property of blocking Slashman's physical slash, but it requires a stage revisit and fighting Proto Man, which I felt overall was unnecessary. The Rush Suit adapter severely limits Mega Man's mobility because Mega Man can no longer slide, so it was basically useless for this challenge. There are some fringe cases where it could be helpful, but it wasn't worth the time to get it. With this sort of challenge, there's an important concept of time efficiency, where I would rather keep the run as short as possible without rushing, so that failed attempts can be reset. By adding in many optional things that may or may not marginally help, the run becomes slower and it's harder to get to the finish line. This game is already one of the longer Mega Man games on time for this kind of challenge, so I opted to stay as minimal as possible. With that, let's cover the run that made it all the way. Mega Man 7 starts with a 2-minute cutscene, which is already a rough start to having to reset the game for attempts for this challenge. Afterwards, the intro stage is pretty straightforward. The mini-boss Mad Grinder can be dodged with good spacing easily. Then onto Bass, also known as Forte, who is surprisingly a pain. He will shoot randomly with variable amounts of time between shots. He will jump when Mega Man fires, so the general strategy is to continually fire shots to force him to jump, which makes it safer to stand still than react to a shot. Bass can do some very rude back-to-back shots that make it extremely hard to react to. This fight surprised me over time with how volatile it could be. I am very glad nothing like this was later in the run. Onwards to Cloudman stage, first of the Robot Masters. With Mega Buster only, this stage is still pretty easily clearable. The Surinatori purple bird enemies are tricky to deal with, but defeating the first in the pack will cause the others to fly away without tracking. The Delu Peepee enemies, which are the Mega Man 2 throwback to Peepee, were problematic early in attempts, since failing to defeat them quickly results in disaster. The majority of the stage is reasonable, however. Cloudman himself is a simple fight with Mega Buster, but unfortunately when he is moving vertically during the end of his attack cycle, he will randomly choose when to hover down to the ground before rising up again, which caught me in a few attempts while trying to slide under him. Next up is Junkman. The first difficult part of this stage is the elevator. The heli-mets come down from the ceiling at random spots, and their bullets come out in diagonal patterns. It was usually not so bad to dodge, but every now and then, some very difficult pattern would occur. Rush Jet is acquired in this stage and used immediately over the junk heap sections. Junkman himself is extremely susceptible to Thunderbolt and was rarely an issue to deal with. Freezeman comes next. The Shiroku Machine GTV enemies are the big polar bears, and I opted to Mega Buster them down. Their patterns are consistent, so good placement and shot timing is enough. The majority of the stage is simple platforming and patience. Onto Freezeman himself, which is arguably the second hardest Robot Master to fight. Freezeman is a very interesting fight. He starts out by waiting for Mega Man to move before doing anything. He will do some deterministic things, like while he's walking horizontally, he will jump when Mega Man jumps or uses a weapon. He is also on a general pattern where he will walk, fire an ice orb upwards to spawn ice crystals that later fall, then he jumps and fires a shot horizontally, and then he jumps at an arc and fires a shot towards the ground to freeze it, which can freeze Mega Man in place temporarily. At first, this fight is pretty overwhelming, but thankfully it is mostly consistent, but depending on Mega Man's timing with hits, he may skip a part of his cycle. It's a lot to keep track of. Over time, I changed this fight a lot to make it more consistent and safe, but no matter what, it was one of the heavier execution fights. The fourth Robot Master is Burstman. Burstman is a complicated stage, and having special weapons is helpful here. The underwater section with Swim Metal DX is surprisingly tricky. The mini-boss, Kaniganse, is destroyed with Junk Shield and is a consistent fight, but being a little off on timing will result in disaster. Rush Jet helps in the next section, then the final horizontal screen is taken safe and slowly. This screen makes the player want to go faster to get it over with, but it is really not worth rushing or risking. Burstman himself is very much a feel kind of fight on timing. I definitely lost a few runs to him. If Mega Man gets encapsulated by his danger wrap, the player can mash out of it, but the bombs will detonate based on differing cycles and it is easy to get lost in it all. He is weak to Freeze Cracker, and some visual cues and good timing will take him out. The Robot Museum is the mid-stage in this game, unlocking after 4 Robot Masters. It is really just a hallway into the boss fight against Mash the Clown. This fight starts off with him jumping towards you, and there are 2 arcs, but the reaction is mostly the same for both jump patterns. Danger Wrap is his weakness, and Danger Wrap can be placed as a bomb on the ground to deal damage. Because his bounce arcs are predictable, good alignment yields a consistent fight. Onto the jungle, where no one's friend Slashman lives. According to the lore, Slashman is the head of the dinosaur unit and was modeled after Pluto from Mega Man 5 Game Boy. Unfortunately, we don't have Scorch Wheel, so we can't burn down the jungle. Anyways, Rush Jet gets heavy usage in this stage to bypass the Technodon section. The mini-boss, King Gojulus, is a non-trivial fight. He has 2 attacks, which is to breathe fire or to fire sets of 3 orbs. When King Gojulus is in critical health, he starts moving extremely fast, so that is definitely not desirable. The goal is to defeat him in one fell swoop, therefore the best plan of action is to wait for the 3 orb attack, since he stops moving entirely for a while, then use Junk Shield to take him out. This often involves a dance with him to go back and forth and wait for the 3 orb attack. If Mega Man is too close to him, the 3 orb attack will definitely make contact, but if Mega Man is too far, the fire breathing attack will make contact, so the player has to look for visual cues including King Gojulus' jaw moving to predict the next attack. Next is onto Slashman himself, whose fight was covered earlier in depth. In this first battle, the only tools to utilize are the Mega Buster and Freeze Cracker. Let's talk about damaging him. As we discussed, Slashman will change from phase 1 to 2 when he either takes 2 hits or takes a hit from his weakness. But there's an interesting strategy where the player can deal 2 hits, but the second hit is during a time when Slashman will stand on the ground and physically slash, which actually leaves him open for a 3rd hit. So the idea is to use Charge Mega Buster for 4 damage, then hit him with Freeze Cracker for another 6, a total of 10 damage. Bosses have 28 health, so this means Slashman will only go into the very dangerous phase 2 twice. If the player only used Freeze Cracker for 6 damage and didn't do the Mega Buster shots, Freezeman would go into phase 2 a total of 4 times, which is way more dangerous. In this run, this fight went pretty well, but the first phase 2 had many eggs fall in the same place, which came down to a very tight slide jump to clutch out. Otherwise, the damage cycle was correct here. 2 charged Mega Buster shots, Freeze Cracker, then do that again, then the final cycle is 1 charged Mega Buster shot and a Freeze Cracker. After that whirlwind, it's on to Springman. Springman's stage is very straightforward, and Junk Shield is extremely good here. However, the Petaforth and Tom Daddy enemies do take a few hits from Junk Shield to be defeated, so it's important to move slowly and carefully to ensure they are defeated before moving on. Rush Jet helps at the end of this stage too. Springman is extremely susceptible to Slash Claw and goes down with ease. There's a technique to jump while he's jumping in the center to bypass his next attack, but if the player misses it, it's not a big deal to dodge and attack later. Shademan is the next Robot Master. His stage starts off with a mildly scary section outside where the zombie enemies can spawn randomly. I utilize a strategy where I wait for about half a second on the ledge to see where enemies spawn, then I react accordingly. The mini-boss Van Pookin is taken out with Thunderbolt. This mini-boss will open up a different path based on which phase the player defeats it. The east exit is by far the best path for safety, so Van Pookin is taken out immediately to open that path. The rest of the stage is straightforward. Shademan himself follows a similar pattern each time, and after the 3rd Wild Coil hit, he can either come down or swoop again, but it's all very reactable. To the final Robot Master stage, Turbo Man. The stage starts out with Truck Joe, who goes down to Thunderbolt, but the Turbo Rotor enemies can spawn off screen, so they must be tracked closely so they don't ram into Mega Man. The tire section is a scary section to deal with this late in the run, and being a little off on timing can result in immediate spike death. Junk Shield helps with the trio the wheel enemies. In the fire pillar section, careful movement is used to make sure the fire pillars spawn consistently. This is definitely a scary part of the run because a minor movement mistake will definitely result in getting hit immediately. Afterwards, CC Truck guards the end of the stage, but with a good setup it is taken out with Noise Crush consistently. Turbo Man is up, and is the same fight every time, except for when he charges between taking damage. There is an audio cue for when he will charge, which varies quite a bit. The player has to definitely pay attention, but it rarely was a problem for me. Onto the Wily stages. Between each Wily stage in this game, Mega Man will get all of his ammo back, which highly simplifies weapon routing. It means that each stage can use as much weapon energy as the player would like and not have to worry about it. Not many Mega Man games have this, so we use it to maximum potential. Wily Stage 1 starts off with a large horizontal screen, which Mega Buster shots clean up nicely. Rush Coil and Jet get some usage here, and Junk Shield deals with the next section nicely. This trio of the wheel enemy was a source of headache until I realized that simply standing still with Junk Shield was the best technique. After a climb up, it's on to Base 1, which is definitely the most difficult part of the Wily stages before the refights. This is a scripted fight, but it is highly technical on its execution. Base will fire shots when Mega Man is on the same height as him. He jumps consistently across fights, but that consistency depends on Mega Man's placement being relative left or right of him. Further, using a charged version of Noise Crush will cause him sometimes to stand still and fire his next shot, which will change his jump pattern. I routed and practiced this fight a lot because it needed to be clean for when the damageless run up until this point made it out of 8 robots. Base has an interesting property in both his fights where he can be hit out of his invincibility frames for his final hit. In other words, the player can fire 2 shots back to back at the end of the fight to finish him off. Afterwards, a short section leads to Gutsman G, the boss. He is weak to Slash Claw, and will either summon a Bolda or charge at the player. Both are reactable with good timing, but the charge attack requires careful shot timing to avoid getting grabbed. Onto Wily Stage 2, Turtles Homeland. The climb up is pretty simple with Junk Shield and Thunderbolt. Base 2 is this stage's mini-boss. This fight evolved over time for me, and I eventually found a way to keep his patterns extremely consistent. The idea is to jump to the top of the room and track whether he goes left or right from his bottom corner. Then the player reacts accordingly and squeezes in hits. If the player's movement is good, Base will always do the same type of movement himself, so it just took some practicing to get it right. Afterwards, the climb continues with Junk Shield. Rush Coil is used for the fire section, where the fire pillars will always spawn consistently based on the camera putting them into range of view. This section is definitely a little tense, because falling down means everything is relatively off cycle, and it's very hard to recover from. The boss of this stage is Gamerizer. Gamerizer has some varying patterns, but ultimately the fight comes down to patience and dodging fire. The hardest part of this fight is to slide under him as he rams back and forth between attacks between 1 to 4 times, which sounds simple, but when the player's nerves are stressed, it is easy to get caught up in it. Technical errors that involve sliding in this game almost always result in immediately getting hit, and that's especially true here. After use of Wild Coil and Patience, he goes down. Wily Stage 3 is next. This stage is the easiest of the 3 so far. There's no mini-boss, and playing patiently works out. I routed this stage a few times to make sure to combat possibly taking damage. In particular, the Rush Jet section on the 3rd screen benefits from good placement of Rush Jet. Staying on the back of Rush Jet means the Metal FX will spawn slightly earlier, giving the player time to bypass it before it starts firing too close to Mega Man. Rush Jet cleans up the majority of the stage. An S-Tank and a W-Tank are retrieved here, which will be used in the final stage. Stegosaurus, aka Final Stegosaurus, blocks the way, but unfortunately he never landed a hit on me. The boss is Hanya NED Squared, who is highly susceptible to charged Noise Crush. Good sliding and placement makes this boss pretty easy. And here we are, Wily Stage 4, the refights. As is the case with every challenge run like this is by far the hardest stage in the game. The refights are scary and difficult. We naturally choose to fight Slash Man immediately to get him out of the way. As mentioned before, his arena is smaller here. However, we do have Scorch Wheel, which allows the player to burn the goop from the eggs, which is marginally useful. Using Scorch Wheel causes Mega Man to temporarily slow down, so it must be used wisely. Scorch Wheel will not deal with eggs as they fall, unfortunately, but overall it is a tool worth using. Slashman's first phase 2 here resulted in an extremely gut call of me sliding into the wall under him to the left. If he dropped down, the run would have been over. Freezeman is the next hardest Robot Master and is conveniently right next to Slashman at the top. This fight was actually very scary. I got my feet frozen, so I had to mash out of it, then had to pivot on the fight a bit, but I managed to keep it together and finish. The rest of the refights up until Burstman are pretty straightforward and rarely a problem. For Burstman, I lost a run earlier that week to him, so I came up with a different opener that more safely set up position for the fight. But he goes down and it's off to the final boss. Wily Machine is a straightforward and simple fight. He will either spawn Skulltons, which go down to 3 danger wraps each, or will just jump around. It's imperative to clear the Skulltons as they appear because Wily Machine will do a dangerous stomp attack if the player lets them live. This fight was mostly not a problem. Wily Capsule, our final boss. This Wily Capsule is well known among Mega Man fans to be arguably the hardest final boss in the series. It is a major barrier to finishing this run. At first, I thought both Slashman and Wily Capsule were going to be the hardest parts. There are more technical and difficult fights in the game than Wily Capsule, including Freezeman and Phase 1 and Wily 1 stage, but Wily Capsule literally guards completing this challenge and is still quite hard. I devised a technique to use Rush Coil to dodge his orb patterns. The general idea is that I would recognize where he spawned, hit him with Charge Wild Coil, then summon Rush Coil. I would wait for Wily's laugh as a visual cue, then depending on where he spawned and my positioning, I would slightly alter my timing to jump on Rush Coil, then dodge. Generally, the closer he is to the middle of the screen, the tighter the timing is. This fight takes a lot of practice, and you really have to rely upon your muscle memory to not mess up any of the slides to dodge. Some shots always look like they are super close, but that's just the way it is. After 14 charge wild coils, careful dodging and placement, Capsule goes down and the challenge is completed. Going into this challenge, I knew that Mega Man 7 was going to be tough, but it really was tough. The game is long, there's a fair amount of randomness. Mega Man's sprite is pretty large in this game. There's a lot to deal with. But even though I knew Slashman was going to be the major problem of the challenge, I still wasn't totally aware of how ridiculous he could be. The hardest part of this challenge is by far keeping your nerves and attitude in check as you deal with attempts. When you get runs past a difficult section of the game, you aren't done with the hard parts. You still have to carry the weight of a good run and not mess up anywhere else. And when you make it past the hard parts like Slashman, you really don't want to mess up anything after, so it's all very stressful. But I think I have a good disposition and attitude with this sort of challenge, and I managed to pull through. This game was really fun to play and route. I had to come up with a ton of strategies in order to make this challenge feasible. It was by far the most difficult of the challenges so far, after completing Rockman 2, 6, 8, and 9. Thank you for watching. If you like this video and the style of content, please consider subscribing to the channel and let me know your feedback in the comments. See you for the next one.